What is up, Steeler fans? And when you hear that music, when you hear my voice, and it's not Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday on the Steel Curtain Network, gosh, it's a lot of days. Anyways, that means it's a Source podcast. Dave Schofield's joining me to talk about this. Dave, what's up?
Not too much, Jeff, other than I love getting this kind of news to see what's going on. We're only one day away from the Steelers taking the field again, right. So there's a lot to be excited about.
There is a lot to be excited about. And just as a reminder to everyone that might just be finding our podcast platform in some way, shape, or form, these Source podcasts are from within inside the Steelers facility, within the organization. We at Steel Curtain Network feel that you, the Steeler fan, should get the best and most up-to-date news from our source. And so not all of this is going to be dubbed breaking news. Yeah, and that's something that a lot of people skew those lines a little bit. A sourced information is just we're hearing what we're hearing from within the inside the organization, and we want to deliver it to you. And in this case, it's about the offensive line. It was a very brief conversation with the source today who said, just so you know, Troy Fautanu is going to be starting at right tackle in week 2. We kind of knew this. He had been practicing the last 2 weeks. He was not on the injury report this week, I don't believe. Correct, Dave?
He was not.
Okay, I didn't
in any way.
Yes. So he's ready to go, and the Steelers say he's ready to go. So they're going to get him into the starting lineup. That's what we know from the source. Before we go any further about what the repercussions and the ripple effect of this move will be, Dave, what are your thoughts about this rookie first-round draft pick starting in week 2 in Denver?
Okay, so sticking just with the Fautanu.
Yes, not the ripple effect yet.
Yeah, that to me, that goes to show me that a player that played that many games in college, lots of experience, that even though he's switching sides, the Steelers felt like they had a plug and play type player when they drafted him. So there sometimes you get those, sometimes you don't. So this tells a lot of how they viewed him from the beginning, and to see if he was capable of doing that. And that's therefore they had a plan, and they're sticking with it now that he's available.
Now, if you go all the way back to post NFL draft, we're getting ready for training camp. We did a source podcast. It might have been the early weeks of training camp. I cannot remember, if I'm being honest. It was all about how the Steelers are going to have an open mind about their offensive line this year. That typically, yes, we've said it a million times, they don't like to start their starters. They don't like to put their rookies out there early and start their starters. They don't like to start their rookies early in their career. And so they want to give them time to get acclimated, but they said they're going to have to think different with this group. And there's 2 players in particular, Troy Fautanu, first-round pick, Zach Frazier, second-round pick. Zach Frazier has had glowing reviews so far since he took over when Nate Herbig went on injured reserve as the starting center. Troy Fautanu, we also reported that they were looking at him to start at right tackle. And this was also reported by people like Jerry Dulac of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that they wanted him to start, Troy Fautanu, that is, in week 1. Then he sprains his MCL in the first preseason game, and that throws a wrench in everything. Because, Dave, I'll tell you what I think. This is all speculation. What we told you in terms of the news, what we hear from the source, is what we just told you. What I'm going to say now is what could be the ripple effect. But I first want to say that I think the Steelers had a plan. The plan was, we're going to get Fautanu because he is that plug-and-play player that you mentioned, and he's going to be our right tackle. And we're going to start having a battle at left tackle between Dan Moore and Broderick Jones. May the best man win. And I'm sure the Steelers are hoping that Broderick Jones would win that. Why? He was their first-round pick in 2023. They traded up to get him. You hope that's the guy for the next 10-plus years at left tackle. Then he gets hurt. Fautanu goes down with an MCL sprain, and now that plan is now thrown out of whack. Broderick Jones has to stay at right tackle. Dan Moore has to be left tackle. And so Broderick Jones is missing some valuable reps at left tackle. So I think that was their plan. Would you agree or disagree with the Steelers' plan after we heard what we heard from the source?
I mean, do I agree or disagree that was what their plan was?
Do you think that was their plan?
Do you think it was a good plan?
No, let's start with, do you think that was the plan? And then follow it up with, do you think it was a good plan?
Yeah, the plan was to, hey, if we're drafting another tackle, we took one in the first round last year, even traded up a couple spots for him. Didn't really have to give up all that much to go do it because they recouped that anyway.
Yeah.
But it was the whole mentality of, let's get him. You're not going to have those two guys being the guys fighting it out for one job for the rest of their careers. That doesn't make sense to do that with back-to-back first-round picks. So You knew it was going to be one on one side, one on the other, unless they were going to make one of them switch to a different position like guard, or even center for Fautanu, which we knew wasn't going to be the case as soon as they drafted Zach Frazier. So I get that as being the plan. I do. I mean, these two guys are under contract after this season. Broderick Jones for 2 with an option of a 3rd year, and Fautanu for 4 with an option for a 5th year. Meaning including this year. So that's going to be your answer. Dan Moore is not under contract anymore. So that was a really good plan. But at the same time, you also have to make sure the last thing they wanted to do was force somebody into action before they should have, in a way that would have, kind of stunted their development. So that's what's good about having that other option. But to me, it was the injury that threw the wrench into this. Now the question is, can you jump right back into the plan? You have to get a feeling out for it. And the Steelers, obviously, they got to be happy with it.
Yeah. And so the plan was the plan, and then the plan had to be shifted. And so next question that everyone's probably going to have, and we don't have the answer to that, but we'll find out soon enough at Sunday at 4:25 Eastern time. Who's going to play left tackle? If I'm a betting man, I'm betting that Dan Moore gets to start at left tackle. Dave, what say you?
All right. So as long as you were asking the specific question of who is going to get the start at left tackle this week at 4:25 in Denver.
That is correct.
As long as I am laying out the parameters of that question, then that's when I say I believe it's Dan Moore. Dan Moore had a really good game last week. As I've reported, he had the 3rd highest pass blocking grade by Pro Football Focus, whether you like their grades or not. Are they going to get it that bad? I mean, usually they get it wrong when they say, oh, Myles Garrett had 1 quarterback pressure on Dan Moore. Dan Moore gets a 0 and Myles Garrett gets a 96. Those kind of stuff. When they actually were grading him out as doing very good at pass blocking, like I said, 3rd best, not just tackle. Now, it was tackle, believe it or not, but of any player in the NFL in week 1, he had the 3rd best pass blocking grade. That tells you that something was going right. He allowed no pressures, none. Now, the run blocking, it was above the line, but it wasn't as great as what stood out with the pass blocking. I went back and watched every one of his snaps Monday morning because I wanted to get a better feel, because people had the narrative out there, oh, Dan Moore's just so terrible, they need to get him out of there. He wasn't. Don't just repeat that just because it's what you think. If you don't actually see it and know it, go look, go watch. Then decide if he's getting the job done. And I understand that the answer for the future is Broderick Jones. But do you think the elbow could maybe even come into this? Anything going on with Broderick Jones, it might not be the worst thing for him to take a step back for a couple weeks. Maybe get a little bit more healthy, get a little bit more perspective. His best game last year was at left tackle. So I think we'll get a better Broderick Jones at left tackle. But right now, is he really that best option? This would be, Jeff, do you kind of look at this as being similar to what do you do the last game of the season, or even the playoff game with the Steelers last year at quarterback? Do you go with the guy who's playing well right now, even though you don't have him under contract beyond this year? Or do you go with the guy that's supposed to be, now we all know how things went in the offseason, who's supposed to be your future at the position? Which one is most important to do right now? Now, of course, there's a big difference between week 2 of the season and week 18 or the playoffs. That is a whole different, but it's the same mentality of, do you go with the player that might be the best for you out there right now, still knowing that that's not your answer for the future, even though the other guy has a lot of experience from last year?
I think that sometimes the Steelers, you have to pivot, or pivot, as for a friend's reference. But still, sometimes you have to switch and change your mentality. And I said this on Friday's Let's Ride podcast with Jeremy Betts when we had our All Bets Are Off segment. We talked about the tackle situation, and I said, if the plan is, okay, Broderick Jones is going to need more reps at left tackle, and he's also not right, like you mentioned, the elbow injuries, we're in that big old brace. And so if their plan is, let's give him a couple weeks, let's have Fautanu at right side, Let's have Dan Moore at left, and let's get Broderick Jones. He can be that. Maybe he comes in and reports as eligible, and they use him in that role, similar to Zach Banner back when he was in Pittsburgh. Maybe that's what you do. Okay, that's fine. But then eventually I would hope to see him inserted at left tackle, and then Dan Moore becomes the backup. If the plan is, well, we're just going to ride this year out with Dan Moore and Broderick Jones is just going to sit and watch unless there's an injury, I don't like that plan at all. I think that would be an idiotic plan. So for me, I'm okay if the plan is we're going to take a couple weeks, Broderick Jones, get him right, get him reps, get him acclimated to the left side again, and then that's his job, and he's going to take over. I don't want to see them wait until Dan Moore has a turnstile game, and we've all seen him have those games before, that then they say, oh, got to change it now. Like, don't wait till that moment. If Broderick Jones is ready and he has a higher upside and he is capable, put the dude in. Put the dude in and let him play. But if they feel like he's not ready from a health perspective or from a repetitions experience standpoint, I'm okay with him taking a couple weeks. Dave, what do you think?
Yeah, well, first of all, I do have to say this. The term turnstile with me, that bothers me a little bit. Because first of all,
he's had games like that, Dave. He's had games.
Has he ever had a game where he's given up more than 2 sacks?
Probably not.
I know. So I don't think he has. I'd have to go back and double check. I mean, at the most, it would be 3. But at the same, so when you say turnstile, you're thinking like, man, they're just going right through. But at the same time, you also have to remember, part of the reason I don't like the word turnstile is, let's just say this. I am significantly taller than you. Yes. When I go through a turnstile, it is not something that I feel like you can just blow through because it hits me in a very specific position where I have to be very aware whenever I walk through. So that's why I cringe every time I hear that word. Anyway, so back to talking about football.
Yeah.
Here's another possibility. Now, I'm not, this is just, we gave what the source told us. So now we're just speculating with all this because we don't know what's happening at left tackle. If the Steelers feel that Broderick Jones is ready for left tackle, and the Steelers also feel that Dan Moore Jr. is really getting the job done at left tackle and doing a phenomenal job, that's not a bad problem to have.
Yep.
But there's also a solution. You know what? If Dylan Cook comes off IR, if Isaac Seumalo is able to come back and Spencer Anderson isn't in the lineup, and in case you do that, in case of emergency, break glass to put him at tackle, maybe there's someone whose left tackle has gone down. I haven't even looked around the league to know if there's anything that's already happened or whatnot. But also to me, because here's the other reason why. You're like, but you don't want to you wouldn't want to trade Dan Moore for less than you would get in a comp pick. Well, you're only going to get a comp pick, one, if he signs a big deal, which based on this year, granted, it's only a 1-game sample. If he continues what he was doing in week 1, even just at 80 or 90% of that, he's going to get a decent contract somewhere next year. But you're only going to get a comp pick if you're not buyers, if you're more selling than buying when it comes to free agency. So to me, do you really want to not be big buyers in free agency this year because you want that pick from Dan Moore? Or would you rather flip it for a pick now if you really need to get Broderick Jones out there? But one more thing I want to say about Broderick Jones. What we said about Troy Fautanu and how we said we believe the Steelers feel about him, about a plug-and-play type player, that was not Broderick Jones. Broderick Jones was not a plug-and-play tackle coming out. If Broderick Jones has the measurables and the athleticism of if he was a plug-and-play tackle, he would have gone in the top 5 to 8 picks, without a doubt. The reason he didn't go any higher is because he only had 19 starts in college. He was still very raw. He was so good and athletic, he wouldn't have to always have good form. He could just be that much better than his opponent, just that much more physically gifted, and he could get by with that. So there's still things that he has to work on. And granted, you've got to actually play some in order to be able to do that. So maybe it's just, hey, we got a couple things we can ease him into a little bit more, especially since he's a guy that doesn't have a lot of starts when he first came into the league compared to Fautanu, who did. He had a whole bunch of them in Washington. So can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Do you see a scenario where the Steelers even potentially switch up the players in game? Not because of performance, but because of more of a even if they're choosing a rotation or, getting them all a little bit of playing time. I know that was floated out there by some plays. I think even Jim Wexell mentioned that on the Steel City Insider podcast in the past of, maybe Fautanu is not ready for a whole game, but you can get him in there some, you can rotate him in some. Usually you don't rotate your offensive line.
That I would have answered your question with a question and said, you're the guy that played offensive line. Like when I played football, which middle school, I was on the outside. I was a cornerback, wide receiver, like keep me out of the scrum. I was a tiny little kid. You were the guy that played through high school, coached the position. I wouldn't think that tackle is a position that's conducive to changing. It's not like a running back. Okay, we got a running back by committee. How many teams do a right tackle or a left tackle by committee? I don't think that sounds conducive to success. What do you say?
Well, see, you say about me who played and coached. I have to look at it as this. This is the big leagues. This is the big leagues. So if you want to equate it to high school football, this is varsity. Coach Tomlin uses that all the time. Being JV or varsity. This is varsity. I don't know that you would do that on varsity. What you would do is you would find a way to get your best. If you had 3 great tackles, you'd find a way to get all 3 of them on the field by having somebody play something else. Yeah. But you're at a very limited time. They're gone in a year or two. It might be their only season. Now, for me, when I was coaching freshman football, that's below JV. So for Coach Tomlin says that's a JV performance, I'm lower than that. That's when you're like, hey, all 3 of these guys are deserve to get some playing time. If this is all about development and everything else, then I would have done that. But I don't know that that's an answer at the NFL level. I think they might just let situations dictate week to week. But unless there's something that pops up in game, I think you just roll with who you got unless someone is struggling a little bit.
I agree. All right. Well, we don't want to have these go too long. These source podcasts, we do appreciate. We'll get a lot of answers on Sunday at 4:25 Pittsburgh Standard Time, like Dave's podcast. When we find out who is at left tackle, how do they handle that? What are the duties, responsibilities? And I'm sure Mike Tomlin will be asked about this, and we'll have a lot of that coverage on our post game show. In the meantime, stay tuned to Steel Curtain Network, both steelcurtainnetwork.com. That's a great website. I want you to check it out, steelcurtainnetwork.com, as well as all of our podcasts that you can find us on YouTube, wherever you have your social media platform. Find us, Steel Curtain Network. We are there. But Dave, thank you very much for your time, man. We'll see you next time on another Steelers Source podcast.